Can I tell you a cool story? In fact, this is one of the coolest stories you've never heard. We're going way back to Vietnam for an absolute saga, so stay with me. The ending of this one is going to blow your mind. Let's get into it. By 1972, the Vietnam War was dragging towards a bitter conclusion, and most Americans were eager to leave it behind. At home, the public had turned sharply against the war, the government responsible for it, and even the troops fighting in it. Over there, North Vietnamese forces were readying for one last major attack, designed to overrun the South and end the war in their favor once and for all. The United States, knowing their time there was coming to an end, had already implemented Nixon's strategy of Vietnamization, which saw American troop levels drop 90% from their peak, and responsibility for combat operations was shifting unilaterally to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, or the ARVN. Some of the only Americans remaining on the front lines included American Anglicos, Marine, Air, and Naval Gun Liaison officers. Anglicos were embedded deep with Vietnamese units, and their job was to direct air and artillery strikes from aircraft, ships, and ground forces during battles. When they say the biggest gun you can carry into battle is your radio, this is who they're talking about. These Marines, alone, depending completely on their Vietnamese counterparts for their lives, and vice versa, were some of the last on the ground. And in this role is where we find John Walter Ripley in the early spring of 1972. Ripley was already very experienced in Vietnam. In 1967, he deployed along the DMZ and conducted hundreds of combat operations and was severely wounded and medically evacuated during one of them. Despite that, he returned to his unit and finished that deployment. He also spent time training and deployed with Royal Marines and Marine Recon units, but he had never done anything like this. In his role as an Anglico with the Vietnamese Marines, a position that they called Covan, which translated to trusted friend, he lived, fought, suffered, and ate alongside people who didn't even speak his language by and large. But they did have one trait in common. These were all warriors. And that status wasn't just given out, it was always earned. These Vietnamese Marines from the Vietnamese Marine Corps Battalion, or the VNMC, were a unit known as the Soi Bien, or the Sea Wolves. They were battle-hardened and legendary in their own right, having completed countless operations, and were trained by American Marines themselves. Their commander, his name was Major Le Ba Bin, had a long and storied history in the war. But if you didn't know it, you could figure it out just by looking at the scars on his body. He had led his unit through so many battles you couldn't even count them, and had been wounded on 12 different occasions, and despite that, those wounds oftentimes being severe, he never gave up his leadership role. He was deeply admired by his Marines, and they were so loyal to him. Any outsider like Ripley would have to prove themselves in order to be accepted into that unit. But for Ripley, this was not really a problem because Bin knew of Ripley from his reputation on his prior deployment in the same AO and considered him a peer. Ripley, as an Anglico, had a radio operator assigned to him. His name was Na. Na was a baby-faced junior Marine who, if he was walking through a city, you would think was a 16-year-old kid. But he was no civilian and he was no kid, and as a radio operator, he oftentimes presented himself as a big target for the enemy. With a huge blocky pack that had a 15-foot antenna coming out of the top, he might as well have just been carrying around a sign that said, "Shoot me." But throughout their time together, Na stood side by side with Ripley in battle, exposing himself to enemy fire and sprinting stride for stride across open terrain with Ripley. The two of them became so close over time that Ripley called him his little brother. By the middle of March, the Soi Bien had taken up camp at an abandoned American base near Dung Ha, and that was along the Qua Viet River, which flowed directly into the South China Sea. This base, which once housed over 50,000 American troops, which was more than was left in the entire country at this time, was basically a ghost town. Ripley knew the base well. He spent time there on his last deployment before he was wounded and medically evacuated. When they settled there, Major Bin picked a building that would become their headquarters, and Ripley recognized it. He actually knew it really well. When he was there last time, it was the morgue. This was a fact Ripley would keep to himself to avoid interfering with Bin's authority or spooking the already superstitious Vietnamese Marines. The building did end up being a good choice, because while they sustained nightly indirect fire attacks, they were able to take cover there and wait it out. While they continued to work and operate out of that new base, the unit gained some replacement Marines for ones that were injured or killed. Among them was an additional bodyguard for Major Bin. His name was Jack. Commanders like Bin typically had an attaché of guards that were there to look out for them so they could focus on command and control during battles. They were their right-hand man, so to speak. This did not go over well with Bin's current senior guard, Dung. Dung and Jack had tension between them immediately, And it came to a head one evening with this encounter. Dung said to Jack, "You are undeserving, no courage, you have nothing in your pants." Now, you might be laughing, and that might not sound bad when translated literally to English, but in Vietnamese, it was basically a declaration of war. So Dung goes on, "Nobody trusts you. When you came here, nobody smiled. Major Bin does not trust you. You have no loyalty." And Jack, who's just standing there getting berated by Dung, and everyone around is watching like it's an after-school fight. So Jack, he has to do something. He creeps towards Dung until they're standing chest to chest. And then, very much to Ripley and everyone else's surprise, Jack pulls out his knife, grabs the blade around his left index finger, squeezes until it bleeds, and with everyone's attention, Jack, instead of grimacing or wincing from the pain, he smiles, he reveals this gap teeth smile that he has, and in one quick motion, he slices off his own finger, sending it flying across the room, and says, "Today, I cut off my finger for Major Bin. Someday, I'll die for him." And with that, Jack, who it's worth noting is down to 3 fingers and a thumb on his left hand, became the head bodyguard, and not long after, Dung's body was found on the outskirts of the camp, and nobody asked any questions. A couple of weeks later, Ripley wakes up and begins his usual routine. The night before, they took more indirect fire, so he goes off to investigate the point of impact and seeing if he can trace back where it might have come from. And he had barely begun his task when Na comes running up to find him. He's shouting, "Captain Ripley, Captain Ripley," and he hands him a radio, and over the radio he hears, "Stand by for something big, soon, out." This cryptic message definitely sent Ripley's antennas up, but before he could even think too much, Jack comes running up and says, "We have orders. Fall back on Dong Ha, defend the bridge." And they both took off back towards the morgue where they found Bin, and he's already planning for the battle. He says, "I've alerted 2 rifle companies and Alpha Command Group, and they're ready to move." And Ripley says, "I'm ready." Na hands Ripley the radio, and he gets another message from American intelligence. Battalion says, "We have confirmed sightings. Expect tanks." Ripley tells this to Bin, and Bin says, "Well, if they have more than 5 tanks, we're done for." With that, they rallied the Marines and were on the move minutes later, and it was certainly shaping up to be an interesting Easter morning. They were on foot. It was 5 miles between them and Dong Ha, and they weren't halfway there when the first signs of trouble emerged. At first, they saw a handful of people, civilians, and they're walking south away from the river. Then they saw more, then dozens, then hundreds, and then thousands. The entire population of Dong Ha seemed to be fleeing south. Then, bad turned into worse. Bin noticed it first when Ripley noticed the look on Bin's face change and he became enraged, which did not happen too frequently. But then he noticed what had him fired up. The people fleeing were not just civilians, but they were ARVN troops as well, abandoning their post and surrendering before the battle even began. And they walked shamefully among the women, children, and elderly, which let Bin, Ripley, and the Marines know one thing: they were alone here. So Bin got back on his radio to try to find any reinforcements. He called the 20th Tank Battalion, who was nearby, and they said that they'll come defend Dong Ha with the Marines. A little further up the road, they connected with the 20th and their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Lay, and with him was an American advisor named Jim Smock. Smock comes up and greets Ripley, saying, "Nice to see you, Jarhead." And Ripley says, "It's Captain John Ripley. Glad to see you and those machines. There's infantry and tanks descending on Dong Ha, and if they cross the bridge before we get there, we're all done for." Smock confidently says, "I've got these tankers, I trained them, they're ready, let's go, we're prepared." Now, at this moment, whether Smock was bold, brave, ignorant, naive, that would have to wait to be determined. Ripley himself wasn't sure, but these untested brand new tankers versus the experienced NVA, well, that's what they had to work with, so it's out of their hands now. At that time, Ripley gets another call over to radio. It says, "They're close. We don't know how many, but reports from nearby outposts say they can hear them coming. You have to hold the bridge, and you have to do it alone. Do you read?" Ripley says, "Roger, my show. We've got to blow that bridge." Battalion comes back and says, "No, we need to save the bridge for a counterattack." And Ripley replies, "Hey, if we fall at Dong Ha, there's not going to be anyone left to counterattack." The battalion says, "You're right, okay, do it. We have ARVN engineers in the area. We'll have them run demo to the site. Good luck." So now Ripley has a plan, at least the beginning of a plan, and he goes to update Bin. only to find Bin in a shouting match with Lei. Bin's yelling, "You're gonna stay here? You're gonna leave your tanks here? That's your plan? To wait until the enemy comes for you?" What happened was Lei basically decided his chances were better on the highway, waiting for the NVA to meet them on this battlefield versus going to the bridge. But in reality, he probably just wasn't confident that they had any chance. Ripley says, "Listen, Bin and I are going to Dung Ha to destroy that bridge with or without you. If they make it across, those tanks are going to be your tombs." Ripley thought maybe shaming them would motivate them, although it obviously didn't work for the other ARVN. But now the Marines were on the move again. A few hundred meters further down the road, they spotted two NVA T-54 tanks. Just in time, Lei's tanks showed up to give them some support. Smock probably gave them the push. Lei ordered his men to engage them, and they actually destroyed the tanks and the NVA easily. So maybe Smock was right. Maybe they were well trained, and that little skirmish had given them some confidence. They had a chance. But the feeling was short-lived because Ripley got another intelligence update. Tanks are crossing the Dung Ha Bridge unopposed. They're being followed closely by NVA infantry units. The enemy is in Dung Ha. Dung Ha has fallen. So Ripley has this news, and he doesn't know what to do with it. He only knows that the only reinforcements they really had threw down their guns and abandoned Dung Ha. So Bin and his Marines had to decide. Do they hold where they're at and make a stand? Do they retreat, or do they attack? So Bin says, "Ripley, I am going to send a message on my command radio. I want you to send the same message on your advisor radio. There must be no misunderstanding. This is the message. Ignore all rumors that Dung Ha has fallen. There are Vietnamese Marines in Dung Ha. We will fight in Dung Ha. We will die in Dung Ha. We will not leave. As long as one Marine draws a breath of life, Dung Ha belongs to us." Ripley nods, smirks even, and sends the message. As they started to walk the last mile to the bridge, Lei hit them with more bad news. This time, he says, they are staying put. They came this far, destroyed some NVA tanks. That's good enough for Lei, I guess. Bin, so tired of him at this point, he says, fine, they leave them behind, and they start to go. But Smock, not interested in staying back with those tanks, he tags along with Ripley. So they make their way the final mile to the bridge, and as they crest a small ridge, they see it. Smock says, "Oh, it's huge." And it was. Ripley is quoted saying 100 tanks could fire for 3 days and still knock that monster down. And he had good reason to believe this. That bridge was built by Americans. You see, in 1967, the US Navy Seabees built the Dung Ha Bridge to allow South Vietnamese to easily travel to the DMZ from the major bases just on the south side of Dung Ha. They used enough steel in it to build a battleship. Now let's take a minute to get a technical understanding of what this bridge really was. It was 560 feet long, spanned the entire river. Its structure was made of closely spaced I-beams made of steel, overlaid with steel decking on top of that, and then timber on top of that. It was supported by 5 concrete and steel piers with foundations that extended deep into the riverbed. It was built to withstand the current of the river, monsoons, explosions, and sabotage. Now, the other thing that Ripley could see from his vantage point was the enemy. And here he sees tens of thousands of NVA troops and hundreds of tanks. If there was ever a time you would say this is the big one, it's right now. While Ripley, Smock, and Na worked out their next move, the Marines started to dig in for their fight. But as they've already shown, they're not going to sit and wait for the fight to come to them. Sergeant Tran, a fire team leader, had the unit's only 2 anti-tank weapons with him. And there happened to be a tank positioned right at the north end of the bridge. So he started low crawling toward the bridge, arm over arm, dragging 2 ammo cans filled with sand behind him as a little makeshift mobile foxhole. On his back, he had the anti-tank weapon slung, and as he reached the south end of the bridge, he had a clear eye line to the north side. Ripley saw him making his move, but knew those rounds had really no chance of destroying the NVA's T-54s. Despite that, Tran readies his first round, stands up, completely exposes himself to enemy fire, and whispers, "Just one good hit." He fires and misses. Tran takes cover again. Now the enemy has their sights on him. He reloads, stands back up under fire, takes the time to aim, lets it rip, direct hit. The round impacts between the tank's body and turret, disabling the main gun. The tank backed up, wondering what the hell just happened, and parks itself on the north end of the bridge, blocking anyone else from coming over. Ripley used this opportunity to come up with a plan. They would run across the open terrain to a small bunker left behind by the Seabees. Then from there, another mad dash to the bridge. 12 seconds, Ripley says. That's all it'll take. Plenty of time for them to see us, take aim and kill us, but it's the only way we're getting there. We'll sprint to the bunker, and from there, finish our way to the bridge. He looks at Na and says, but Na, you stay at the bunker. Na wonders, why? I want to go. And Ripley tells him, you're our only contact with Brigade. From there, you can see everything there is to report. Besides, I need a witness. If we get blown away, someone has to be alive to tell this story. Na didn't like it, but he understood that that was his orders, and he listens to his captain. And with that, the three of them take off sprinting, bullets splashing all around their feet. They make it to the bunker, catch their breath for a second, and then Ripley and Smock finish their sprint to the bridge. All the while, they're being covered by Bin's Marines, who are now dug into their fighting holes and preparing for a last stand. Ripley and Smock take a minute to check themselves for bullet holes, and then they start looking around for the explosives that they were promised. Ripley did see them, but he didn't like what he was looking at. They sent 5 ARVN engineers, not infantry, engineers, who were now hugging the grass behind a small berm, petrified. Can't blame them. Sitting next to them, a pile of 1x3 wooden crates. And next to that, a pile of canvas satchels of C4. Ripley and Smock had to make the run to get the explosives, and after a few hairy round trips, they did make it and get them. Ripley says, this is it? What am I supposed to do with this? This isn't enough to destroy this humongous, massive bridge. But let's take a second here. Of all the people in Vietnam that day, Captain John Ripley was probably the only man that possessed both the training and determination to even have a chance of getting this done. In between his deployments, Ripley volunteered for some of the toughest training in the entire military, including Ranger School, a demolition course taught by UDT teams, and Royal Commando training. And he's going to need to use all of that today. In Ranger School, he learned how to destroy railroads by offsetting explosive loads in a technique called a twister, the force of which could generate enough force to bring down the bridge, maybe. So Ripley worked out his demo plan. Evenly spaced charge points 20 feet apart at 5 critical points. Each charge would have 2 boxes of TNT and 2 satchels of C4, which weighed a total of 180 pounds, 900 pounds total between the 5. And, oh yeah, after checking all the gear, he didn't have any detonators to actually set these things off once he did it. So he says to Smock, search everything. If we don't find those detonators, I'm going to have to use a grenade. Ripley knew he could use a grenade to set it off, but that would almost certainly kill him. And he hoped Smock would be able to find them for him. So Ripley's ready to get started. Just one problem. The Seabees constructed a concertina wire fence around the base of the bridge to prevent that sabotage I was telling you about earlier, but they never imagined it would be one of their own trying to cross it. Now, if you don't know, concertina wire isn't just barbed wire. It's an apex predator. Imagine thick steel wire with big X-Acto knife blades on it that cut everything into shreds that it touches. It's nasty stuff. Ripley had to cross it, and he asks Smock for some help. Smock, hold that down as best you can while I shimmy over the top of it. So Smock holds it down while Ripley slings his rifle on his back, takes his helmet off, which he doesn't think he'll need under the bridge. He jumps up and grabs an I-beam, swings his heels up, and starts upside down crawling over the concertina wire. He eventually does make it through, but he notices he's already sweating so bad he's starting to wonder if he's going to lose his grip. But he realizes that's not sweat, that's blood. He's shredded himself going through the C-wire. He's only just begun, and he's off to a rough start. So Smock throws him a little zinger. Hey, don't bleed to death, Rip. Watch your head up there. And Ripley says, okay, thank you. Once Ripley was set in between the first set of I-beams, Smock handed him the first 75-pound crate of TNT, and then the second. They had their first stroke of luck when they realized that the 1x3 crate fit snugly in between the longitudinal girders, which allowed Ripley to slide it along the steel as he crawled towards the first pier. So Ripley then slung up 2 satchels of C4, and with his explosives, rifle, the rest of his gear, and that TNT, he set off. But right before he did, he tells Smock, hey, we have got to find those blasting caps, and keep an eye out for primer cord. You'll know that when you see it. Smock thinks, I will? Okay, all right, Rip. Good luck. Ripley inched his way forward, hand over hand, inch by inch, constantly having to stop and drag the TNT, which was getting stuck on the rough steel beams every couple inches, and agonizingly He continued like this for 100 feet to the first pier, all the while taking harassing fire from the NVA. Every time his legs would dip down, they'd take aim. Many of these shots rang off the steel all around him, ricocheting and zipping past him. And while enduring this horrible environment, he set the explosives up very carefully by the book. The first charge point was set, and he had to crawl back the same 100 feet to the south base. The round trip took just over 30 minutes. 1 down and 4 to go. When he got back, Smock was waiting, ready with the next set of demo. Before Ripley could grab it, he had to navigate the next problem. The gap between the channels was too wide to reach, so he would have to jump. He swung his legs back and forth a couple times, hanging from the girder, and then released. And for a moment, in free fall, he thinks, this is insane, and then grabs the second girder. He actually made it, and so back to work. He hauls up the second set, and as he prepares to head back out, this time only 80 feet, he remembers an old Marine Corps song.
1,000 gobs laid down their swabs to lick one sick Marine.
And with that 200 years of tradition in his head, he finds the will to head back out over the river. For the next hour and a half, Ripley carried on. Each trip took basically as long as the last as he continued to fatigue. He continued to take intermittent small arms fire, but for some unknown reason, it was slowing down. Bin's Marines continued to provide cover as best they could, despite, they were really vastly overpowered. And the truth is, at any time, the NVA could just drive over the bridge. Really, nothing was stopping them. But for whatever reason, they never did that. He'd been up there hanging on by fingertips for 2 hours now, and the demo was finally in place. He asks Smock, did you find those detonators? And Smock just holds up something. He goes, how about these? Ripley sees that those are detonators. Shit hot, he tells Smock. Now, how about some crimpers? Crimpers look like pliers. Do you see anything like that? Smock says, no, I don't see anything like that. And Ripley thinks, all right, I'm going to have to do this the hard way. Ripley jumps down from the bridge, all shredded up, completely exhausted. Now, if setting off those charges with a grenade sounded dangerous, what Ripley was about to do might be worse. He says, I'm going to have to use an old miner's technique called jawboning. Smock says, I don't even want to know. By the book, blasting caps were not meant to be handled roughly or gripped too tightly. Ripley was going to crimp them to the primer cord with his teeth. So he measured out 30 minutes of cord, slid the cap over one end, and says, Smock, you might want to take a step back. He puts the cap in his mouth between his front teeth. Too little, it's not going to work. Too much, he'll blow his head off. And then he bites down. 1 down, he says. Hey, Smock, do you want to do the next one? And Smock says, no. Ripley says, good call, I'll do it. So he survives, he makes it, he does all of these with his teeth, which means now he has to head back down the pier. So at this point, the NVA must have figured out that whatever he was doing under that bridge, they intensified their fire on him. Rounds were now constantly pinging off the steel, and Bin's Marines were doing all they could, but it wasn't really deterring them at all. As Ripley finished priming the first pack of C4, boom! A tank round impacted just feet away from him. The blast nearly knocked him into the river below. He clutched onto that steel for dear life, and he thinks, this is it. I'm going to need more than an old war song to get off of this bridge. And so Rip starts praying out loud, Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. Jesus, Mary, get me there. And then Smock yells, move your ass, jarhead, which kind of snaps him out of it, and Ripley becomes a little more refocused. He had the blasting cap in place, and he has to light the primer, so he pulls out a pack of standard issue matches where they specifically say, these matches have been designed to light in damp climates. So he takes out a match, strikes it, nothing. The second one, it does light, so he lights the fuse, which means for him, a countdown's begun, giving him 30 minutes max. One by one, he swings himself across, back to the demo, sets it up, lights the fuse, moves on to the next, and the whole time he's just chanting out loud, Jesus, Mary, get me there. When he was done with the fifth, he made it the last 20 feet back to base, swings down, and collapses. Smock says, you did it, you crazy son of a bitch. And Ripley says, don't even talk to me. I just want to lay here. So then after a minute, Smock says, by the way, I found this. And he holds up a box of electrical detonators. Now, these electrical detonators were a more reliable system than the burning fuses. And if Ripley could wire them up, then he could set the bridge off with just a push of a button. And that would be a redundant system to the one he already has. So he says, I have to go back. Smock, are you kidding me? You can't go back out there. And Ripley looks at him and he kind of knows this is really bad. And he says, hey, Major, you should get out of here in case the bridge goes up. Maybe go see if you can help Na. What Ripley was really saying is, I don't think I'm coming back from this one. So Ripley grabs his 5 detonators, these ones even more sensitive than the blasting caps, and he grabs a spool of wire that they had found left behind by the Seabees, very luckily. He puts the fuses in his pockets, on his chest, and then slings the wire over his shoulder, which by the way is a completely non-standard way to do any of this, and he heads back up. Just as he started back down, a round ricochets off the beams near his head. This was a sniper, the final boss, if you will. Rip knew that even if the sniper didn't hit him, the sparks could strike the detonators, igniting them. And he hoped that if that happened, at least the bridge would go with him. That way it wouldn't all be for nothing. He's pretty disheartened at this point. He's hanging there completely exhausted. His adrenaline's starting to wear off, and he starts to wonder what dying's gonna feel like. And he whispers in his own head, let go of the fear. Make it disappear. He rallies again, keeps on moving. He gets to the pier, swings himself up, and bashes his head into the steel girder. Knocked himself out. I guess he didn't need that helmet after all. When he woke up, he didn't know how long he had left on those fuses, but he was still alive, he still had work to do, so he kept moving. By now, though, the sniper fire basically completely stopped, as well as the other gunfire, and he proceeded to set the detonators on each charge. And as he goes, and he's doing okay, he wonders, why isn't anybody shooting at me? And then he hears it. You can't kill me, you sons of bitches! I'm a tanker! And that's Smock, running across the open terrain, taunting the NVA, and drawing all the fire away from Ripley, saving his life and giving him the time to put the charges on. Rip took the opportunity to jump down from the bridge, cross the wire again, collapsing, completely exhausted. Smock runs back over to him. Get up, Rip, we gotta get out of here. So Smock picked him up, supported him over his shoulder as they make a run for that bunker. Ripley paying out cable behind them as they go, and the Marines saw them coming, and they start to chant, Die we, Captain! Die we, Captain! That translates to Captain Crazy. Captain Crazy. They didn't even know what he was doing, but they thought that whatever he was doing, he succeeded, and they knew it was important. Rip and Smock made it to the bunker, and Rip sees Na after all this time, and he's totally overwhelmed with emotion. He's, good to see you, little brother. And Na says, not happy, sir, not happy. The radio said, da oui, chet fini, het roy. Now, Ripley had picked up enough Vietnamese while he was over there to understand what this meant. Somehow the Vietnamese had passed a message that said the captain is dead, it's over. No one knows where that message got sent from, but Battalion had somehow gotten this intel. They also believed that with that, Dong Ha was fallen and abandoned. So Ripley said, Na, send this. Kovan never die. Then he realized it's been too long. The fuses should have gone off by now. He knew it. They were faulty. But thank God he had the backups. Now he just had to find something to electrify them. Normally they would come with a device called a hellbox that he could wire up and provide the charge, but they didn't have one. He spotted a destroyed Jeep nearby. If that Jeep still had a battery, he could use that. And thankfully, between their position and the Jeep was tall grass that he could use as concealment to crawl to it. Bin and Jack saw Ripley from where they were, and they start moving his way to offer help. When he got there, he navigated through the still burning wreckage until he found the battery. It looked intact. Using his knife, he exposed the copper wire and tied it around the positive terminal of the battery. He exposed the copper on the negative wire and held it, knowing one touch and that bridge is going up. He just hoped his demo plan was enough. With Jack and Bin watching, he touched the wire to the battery. But nothing. He tried again. Nothing. Bin and Jack could tell something was wrong, and they wasted no time. Bin starts to give orders, dig in, something went wrong, this is it, Marines, prepare to make your last stand. And Ripley laid there at the Jeep, totally defeated. All of that for nothing. He failed, he realized. He stares at the sky, then at the Marines who had put all their faith in him, then to Smock and Na, who were taking cover behind the bunker. The NVA was upping their attacks, and this was going to really be the end. And he thought of the telegram that his wife would get, starting with, "We deeply regret to inform you." Then he looked, and he saw her. He turned his head back towards Dong Ha, all smoke and ruins, and through the smoke, he could see the silhouette of a young, petite woman limping slowly towards the highway. She had a piece of wood tied to her leg as a makeshift crutch. Her right foot had been blown off. She had a pack slung across her chest. In it was an infant, her baby. Then he noticed behind her a toddler crying, trying to catch up to their mom. He watched them for a moment, and then the first mortar exploded behind them. Ripley failed at the bridge, but maybe he could do this one good thing. In a second, he was on his feet, sprinting towards them as the rate of mortar fire increased. He reached the girl first, scooping her up, then started towards the mother when the ground shook beneath them, taking him right off his feet. The bridge blew. The fuses worked. He turned back to see steel and concrete flying hundreds of feet into the air, leaving nothing behind. It worked, and it was magnificent. Ripley looked back from the bridge in time to see the little girl running away towards her mom. She caught up, and they continued down the road, disappearing into the smoke. The incoming completely stopped, and for a moment, everyone on both sides collectively just stared at the river where the bridge used to be. Then the Marines simultaneously pop out of their foxholes and start cheering. For them, it was like winning the entire war. Smock and Na ran to catch up to Rip. "You did it," Smock says. And Ripley says, "We did it together. Na, give me the radio." And Ripley transmits this. "Leatherneck, this is Delta. The bridge is down. I say again, the bridge is down. She's in the river. They will not cross at Dung Ha." With this, the NVA collapses into confusion and begins to reorganize to move out, Ripley taking the opportunity to call in airstrikes on them. They were basically sitting targets at this point. When things calmed down, Ripley's body finally gave out on him, and he laid there. Jack comes up and puts his own helmet under Ripley's head as a makeshift pillow. Jack says, "Rest, die we." As the Marines started to move out and fall back on Dung Ha, they passed Ripley and touched his shoulder. An old Vietnamese superstition: touch a survivor and survive yourself. With the Dung Ha bridge destroyed, the NVA was forced to travel miles west to the Cam Lo Bridge, which was slower and more dangerous to cross, but was also left unguarded when the ARVN abandoned their nearby base. After a while, they did make it. Days later, they made their advance to Dung Ha. The Soi Bien were waiting for them, Ripley and Smock with them. Even Lay and his tanks finally got into the fight this time. The attack was ferocious. In the first minutes, mortar fire rained down on the Marines. One round landed right next to them. Ripley's injuries were minor, but Smock sustained severe injuries and required medevac, and Na was killed instantly. It didn't take long before the Soi Bien were overrun. Lay's tanks getting completely destroyed, ordered a retreat. Ripley was carrying Na's body. He was unwilling to leave his little brother behind. He tried to get a tank to stop and pick them up, but none would, so he ran as an NVA fire team closed in on him. Bullets started to splash around his feet, and Ripley knew this time they're really going to get him. He made a desperate run for a berm to take cover and nearly made it. That's when Jack and a few of his Marines appeared from the other side, cut down the pursuing force, and saved Ripley's life. And Ripley was able to get Na out of there. The Soi Bien were able to retreat, and days later they'd find themselves under attack again, this time at night. By morning, they had been reduced to a fraction of their original force. Out of 700 Vietnamese Marines who fought on Easter, 52 remained. While surveying the battlefield, Bin and Rip found Jack, surrounded by dead NVA soldiers, his knife in one hand, his rifle in the other. Ripley ensured Jack was buried with his knife, and inscribed on his grave it read, "This very good Marine, he not die easy." 3 weeks after the Battle of Dung Ha, the NVA was stopped outside of Hue City, thanks only to the precious time Ripley and the Soi Bien bought the army to mount a defense. The Easter offensive had failed. In the aftermath, the NVA fired their leadership, and another large-scale attack would not be attempted for 3 years. Ripley survived and redeployed to the United States in early June. For his actions at Dung Ha, he was awarded the Navy Cross. He'd go on to say that Sergeant Tran's rocket attack at the start of the battle was the bravest thing he'd ever seen, and credits it with the NVA's hesitancy to cross the bridge that day. John Walter Ripley retired from the Marine Corps as a colonel. He passed away in 2008. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery on November 7th. Over 2,500 people attended his funeral. Among his pallbearers was his old comrade, Colonel Lay Ba Bin, now an American citizen living in Texas. Thank you guys for watching that video. I hope it was meaningful to you. Leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you can do me one favor, it's share this story with someone you care about so that heroes like John Ripley and Major Bin's stories don't fade into history. This has been Valor Untold, and I'll see you in the next one.